So for this week, we're really going to continue our discussion of public opinion and public policy from last week. Specifically, we're going to cover Lax and Phillips' democratic deficit in the states. Put some real effort into understanding this piece. Maybe read it a couple of times because you will be using it for assignment 5. So there are a few different ways to think about representation and how public opinion translates into policy. And Lax and Phillips identified this in their piece. The first thing that they identify for representation is responsiveness, and which they say is a positive correlation between opinion and policy. And second is congruence, which just means that policy matches majority opinion. Now, this is from their piece still. We can see this figure regarding liberal opinion majorities. In other words, does the electorate in that state have liberal or conservative policy preferences? The darker, the more liberal the policy preferences of the electorate. As can be seen here, we see it's quite a bit darker along the west coast and the east coast compared to, say, the south. Now, this is about whether those states have liberal policies. So the darker the states, the more liberal the policies. And again, places with more liberal policies tend to be clustered along the coasts, west coast, east coast. But this really doesn't neatly match our public opinion figure from the previous slide, right? There are some places, so for instance, Florida doesn't really look that dark, right, in terms of liberal policies. Like, they are quite moderate, but here you can see that they're a little bit darker than some of the more conservative states. So in any case, I just want to point that out because it leads to our discussion of congruence. This figure shows which states have policies that are congruent with their opinion majorities. So if more than 50% of the population wants lotteries, for instance, like to participate in the lottery, then congruence would mean that that state has that policy, okay? Now, if it's darker here, it means that the state is more congruent with people's preferences. People's policy preferences match the policies in the state. So you can see here that California, Massachusetts, Louisiana do a really good job of translating opinion into policy. But places like Oregon, Wyoming, West Virginia, Pennsylvania, New Hampshire, not so much. Their policies are really not that congruent with their preferences of the electorate. But this doesn't really tell us which way they're biased. Are the policies more liberal than what the electorate wants or more conservative? This figure here depicts that, and the results can also be seen in Table 1, which you should look at. Darker states have policy that is more liberal than what the electorate demands, whereas lighter states have policy that is more conservative than what the electorate wants. Overall, they find that states have a bit more bias in the conservative direction, where states provide more conservative policies than what the electorate wants. On average, there are some exceptions, but for the most part, it tends to lean a little bit more towards the conservative direction. Again, see the figures in Table 1, where negative values in the net incongruence column mean that policy is biased towards being more conservative. They also break this out by each policy and how likely public opinion is to translate into policy by each policy domain. So here you can see abortion notification, abortion counseling, education charter schools, education standard tests. There's also like gaming and the lottery. Just to give you a sense, there's so many different policies that they examine here. Gay rights, hate crimes, all the things. And the little percentage in the figure is how often those opinion majorities translate into policy. So for instance, looking at gaming lottery, that says 86%. This means that 86% of states are congruent between public opinion and policy. If the little chart has a bolded line, that means that there is a statistically significant correlation or relationship between the electorate's preferences and the policies in that state. And the steeper the curve, the more likely public opinion is to correspond to policy. So again, all of these look like there's a pretty good relationship between public opinion and policy. But these right here, like where there's a dashed line or where the line is a little flatter, these show that there's really less of a relationship. And I want to encourage you to look at these in the article, though, because this is not all of the logit curves. There are more logit curves about other policies as well. Now, the question sort of becomes, under what circumstances will we be more likely to see congruence or responsiveness? And these are the results from their models. Now, remember here, everyone, the key is to look for the asterisks. Look for the asterisks. And I'm just going to focus here on the 6th model. Here we can see that policy-specific opinion, which is just this one right here, opinion has a significant and strong effect on policy adoption. The second one, salience. Higher salience also increases the impact of policy-specific opinion on responsiveness. And if we look down, we find that professional legislatures are more likely to enhance responsiveness. And term limits also seem to enhance responsiveness, but I will note Lax and Phillips are a little bit cautious about this finding for good reasons, because term limits is really highly correlated in an inverse way with citizen initiatives. And we see similar findings with policy congruence. So opinion salience is significant, people's opinions are significant in a positive way, and professional legislatures and term limits enhance congruence. Now, I walked you through a lot of this here, but you still will need to read the piece. So this is one of the best pieces that we have right now about public opinion in the states and how often it translates into policy. I would highly encourage you all to look through this one carefully because, again, it's going to be on assignment 5. You'll want to use some of this data for assignment 5 to say how really responsive or representative your state is to public opinion, okay? So this time, all we covered is just the democratic deficit in the states, and we're going to talk about this more in the discussion section and what this means for your state, okay? I will see you all in discussion section.